Arizona Territory, 1879. The day they auctioned her letter was dry and hot, the kind of heat that clung to your bones and made the whole town feel like it was holding its breath. Aven Leigh stood on the edge of the dusty Main Street in Bisbee, her jaw tight, hands clenched in her worn cotton skirt. The letter sat on the auctioneer's table like a piece of meat. A single folded page, her handwriting, her words sold off like property. She could not stop it. Behind her, a man chuckled. Never seen a love letter fetch this much excitement. It is not a love letter, she said sharply, not turning around. Still got your name on it, the man replied, but she was already walking away. Her boots crunched on gravel as she passed the saloon, past the general store, past a tall man leaning against a post with a worn hat tipped low over his brow. He looked up when she passed. Their eyes met for only a second, but something in the way she held herself rigid with anger made him straighten. Colter Kane had only planned on getting supplies. He had not planned on watching a woman's privacy get sold for coin. He followed the sound of the auctioneer's voice, stepping into the crowd just as the man held the letter up in the air. From Miss Aven Leigh, addressed to her sister, but I reckon it reads more like a confession. Who'll start the bidding? Colter's jaw tightened. Aven did not look back. She stood at the far edge of the crowd now, hands shaking but face blank. She had learned young to keep her face still. Her father taught her that before he died fighting for land that was never truly his. The bid started low. A few men, grinning. One of them shouted out, "What's she hiding in it?" "Sweet nothings, secrets?" Aven turned to leave. $5, someone said. Colter stepped forward. "10, he said. The crowd quieted. The auctioneer looked him over. "Well now." "Do I hear 12? 15? Came from a man in the back, one of the ranchers who had been sniffing around Aven since her grandfather passed and left her nothing but a crumbling cabin and a mule. Colter's voice was calm. 20. The auctioneer was grinning now. "Going once." 25, the rancher snapped. Colter did not flinch. 50, the crowd gasped. The auctioneer blinked. "Sold." He handed the letter to Colter. Colter walked through the crowd, slow and steady, until he reached Aven. She stared at him, face unreadable. Without a word, Colter opened the letter, tore it clean in half, then into quarters, then let the pieces fall to the dirt. "You're not for sale," he said. Aven's breath caught. She did not speak. Not then. But her eyes, soft and wide and so tired, locked onto his, and something shifted. Later, after the crowd had scattered and the sun began to dip low behind the hills, she found him again, sitting by his horse outside the livery. "You did not have to do that," she said. He looked up. "I did." She stepped closer. "Why?" Colter stood. "Because no one should have to watch their words sold to the highest bidder, and because I do not like the way that man looked at you." Aven hesitated. "You do not know me." "No," he said, "but I would like to." She looked down, then back up at him. "I wrote that letter to my sister. She passed in childbirth 3 weeks ago. I never got to send it." Colter's voice was quiet. "I am sorry," she nodded, swallowing hard. "They took it from my trunk when I could not pay my rent. Where are you staying now?" "I sleep in the hayloft behind the old smithy." "It is dry at least." Colter's jaw tightened again, but he only said, "I have a place outside town. Small ranch, just me and 2 horses. You are welcome to stay in the spare room if you want." She studied him. "Just like that. I will not touch you. I will not ask anything of you. But I will feed you and you will have clean water and a bed." Aven was silent a long time. Then she nodded. That night she rode behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist but loosely, like she was not sure she belonged there. He did not say anything. Neither did she. But her cheek rested lightly against his shoulder before they reached the ranch. It was a modest place, a single-story house with a wrap-around porch and a small barn. Aven looked around as he dismounted, then helped her down. She followed him inside. The spare room was plain but clean. A narrow bed, a washbasin, a window facing the hills. She turned to him in the doorway. "Thank you," he nodded. "Good night, Aven." "Good night, Colter." He paused, then added, "You are safe here." She believed him. In the days that followed, she helped with chores. She fed the chickens, patched a fence, swept the porch. She did not say much, but Colter did not mind. She was steady, gentle with the animals, careful with her hands. One morning, he found her sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise. He sat beside her. "I used to think I would marry someone like you," she said softly. "Before everything fell apart." Colter glanced at her. "And what changed? My family died. The war took the rest. And men like the one who tried to buy that letter. They circled like buzzards." He said nothing, just rested his hand on the porch beside hers. She looked at it. Then slowly she placed her hand over his. "I do not want to be afraid anymore," she whispered. "You do not have to be," he said. Their hands stayed like that, still, warm, steady. She did not pull away. The sky hung low the next morning, wool gray and still. Aven stood barefoot at the edge of the pasture, her hem damp with dew, arms folded as she watched Colter coax an old mare through a gate repair. The mare was skittish from a thunderclap 2 nights before and had cracked the post clean through with her shoulder. He worked without hurry, movements sure but gentle. Aven didn't speak until he finished and the gate swung smooth again. "You always fix things yourself?" she asked. Colter brushed his hands off on his trousers, then looked over. "No one else out here to do it." She nodded once, then turned her gaze back to the mare, who now grazed quietly with her head low. "I was supposed to be a schoolteacher," she said after a pause. "Took the train to Prescott when I was 19, passed the examinations, even had a room waiting. What happened, my grandfather wrote, said my sister was fading and I needed to come back. I left that week." Colter leaned against the fence post. "That's no small thing. Giving up a future for someone else. She raised me after my mother passed. I owed her more than letters." Colter didn't answer, but the silence felt like agreement, not dismissal. Aven shifted, her voice quieter. "After she died, I tried to go back, but the position was filled. They said I'd been gone too long." Colter looked down at his boots, then up again. "You still teach, even just one person?" She glanced at him. "No, you should." Aven studied him. "You think I ought to teach you your letters, Colter Kane?" He smiled, faint and crooked. "I can read just fine. But I know a boy up the ridge, his ma's raising him alone. She'd give her last hens for someone to teach him numbers." She didn't answer right away. "Then, if you take me there, I'll see what I can do." They stood like that for another minute, the air cool and filled with bird call. Then Aven turned and went to the pump, washed her hands, and set about baking with what little flour remained. By the time the bread cooled, Colter had returned from the ridge with a sack of oats and a newly sharpened blade from town. She set a thick slice on his plate without a word. He nodded his thanks. That evening, after they stabled the horses, he sat on the porch sharpening his knife while she sewed a missing button onto her only decent dress. Her fingers moved slow but steady, and her brows pulled together with focus. "You always live like this?" she asked, not looking up. He ran the stone across the blade. "Like what?" "Quiet, alone." He wiped the knife clean. "Had a brother once. He took a bullet in Dodge. After that, I figured noise wasn't worth much." She tied off the thread with her teeth, then met his eyes. "And now, I don't mind the quiet," he said, "but I don't mind you in it." She didn't blush, didn't look away. Just folded the dress across her lap and said, "I never liked noise either. I just got used to filling it." "Not here," Colter said. "You don't have to." The lantern between them flickered as a breeze rolled in, lifting the scent of sage and warm earth. Aven leaned back slightly, the porch boards firm beneath her. Her body no longer held itself like a drawn wire. "You going into town again soon?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds." She nodded. "I'd like to come." He looked at her carefully, then said, "You sure? I want to find work. I won't live here on kindness alone." "You're not." His voice held no heat, only truth. "But if that's what you want, I'll hitch the wagon." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes eased. "Thank you." That night, she lingered by the doorway before retreating to her room. Her hand brushed the doorframe lightly as she passed. Colter watched her go, then turned down the lantern and stepped out into the dark, letting the piece of the land settle into his chest. Inside, Aven lay awake a while longer, not out of worry, but because for the first time in a long time she wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. The wagon creaked steady beneath them as they rolled into Bisbee under a sky pale with early heat. Colter held the reins loose in one hand, the other resting on his thigh. Aven sat beside him, her hair tucked beneath a faded kerchief, her dress pressed as best it could be. Her boots were clean. She'd brushed them before they left, kneeling by the porch steps with a damp rag and quiet focus. They passed the smithy, a boy stacking kindling out front. Aven glanced at the place quickly, then looked ahead again. "You planning to speak with anyone in particular?" Colter asked. "I heard the apothecary's looking for help. I know herbs well enough," he nodded once. "You do?" She didn't ask how he knew. Neither of them needed to fill every silence. The town wasn't busy yet. A few men outside the bank, a woman pinning laundry behind the boarding house. The tension that had hung around Aven the last time they'd been here was absent now, replaced with a steadier kind of watchfulness. She stepped down from the wagon without help, adjusting her shawl against the breeze. "Will you wait?" she asked. "I'll see to the feed store." "Take your time." She walked the length of the street alone, her steps measured. The apothecary sat between the telegraph office and a bakery that smelled faintly of yeast and wood smoke. The bell above the door gave a soft chime when she stepped inside. Behind the counter stood a woman perhaps twice Aven's age, sleeves rolled to the elbow, mortar and pestle in hand. Her graying braid hung over one shoulder. "You looking for something?" she asked, voice worn but not unkind. "I heard you needed hands." The woman studied her, setting down the pestle. "You know the difference between willow bark and elder?" "I do. Come around back." The room behind the shop was lined with jars bark, leaves, roots, each labeled in a steady hand. Aven walked the perimeter slowly, reading each name, breathing in the mingled scent of dried plants and beeswax. The woman crossed her arms. "I can't pay much. $2 a week and half of what you make on poultices if you mix clean. That's fair. You've worked in a sick room. My sister was midwife north of here. I learned with her." The woman gave a short nod. "Start Monday." Aven left with her shoulders squared, the weight of the news settling low in her chest, not heavy exactly but solid. She found Colter tying down a sack of seed to the wagon bed. "I've got work," she said. He looked at her, eyes steady. "Good." They rode back slower, the air warm and dry. Aven rubbed her palms together absently, fingers dusty from herb jars. Colter glanced over. "You all right?" "Tired, but in a good way." He gave a slight tilt of his head, then turned back to the road. When they reached the ranch, she lingered by the fence before going inside. A hawk circled high above the ridge, casting a long shadow as it glided. Colter unsaddled the horse while she fed the chickens, neither saying much until dusk crept in. Later, she brought out 2 mugs of chicory brew, the closest thing they had to coffee. He accepted his with a murmur of thanks. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked, sitting again beside him on the porch. He took a sip, then rested the mug between his hands. "Once. After the railroad passed me by, figured there might be more out east, but the land's in my blood, can't seem to let it go." She looked out toward the hills, the wind stirring her skirt. "I used to dream about Kansas City. A little schoolhouse, paper maps on the walls, children at desks. You could still have that, maybe, but right now I've got this." Colter shifted, setting his mug down. "What's this exactly?" She turned to face him fully. "A roof, quiet, work that matters. A man who saw me when no one else did." He didn't move, but something in his expression deepened, not softened, just steadied. Aven reached for his hand, no hesitation, no tremble, and laid her fingers over his like she'd done once before. This time her grip held. "I'm not running anymore," she said. Colter's thumb brushed the back of her hand once, slow. "Then stay." She nodded. "I will." The wind blew through the grass, the porch creaked beneath their boots, and the last light of day burned low across the hills. He didn't kiss her, not yet, but his hand stayed in hers long after the stars came out. The first frost came overnight, whitening the pasture and gathering in the corners of the barn like spilled flour. Aven stepped out before dawn, shawl tight around her shoulders, breath curling in the half-light. She'd always liked the early cold. It cleared the air, woke the skin. The ranch looked different under frost, quieter even than usual. She didn't mind. Inside the house, Colter stood at the stove, coaxing heat from the coals. He glanced over when she entered, then handed her a tin cup without a word. She wrapped both hands around it. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "Well enough." He waited a moment, then said, "You were talking in your sleep." Her eyes lifted, said someone's name, Eliza. Aven held the cup tighter. "That was my sister's daughter." She passed with her mother. Colter didn't respond at once. He knelt to add another stick of wood to the fire. "I didn't know there was a child," he said. "She was only 2 months. I tried to keep her warm. The doctor came too late." She didn't cry. The tears had gone dry 2 seasons back. But her voice thinned like a thread pulled taut. Colter stood again, brushing ash from his palms. "You don't have to carry that alone." "I wasn't planning to." A pause. "But I didn't know if you'd ask." "I'll always ask." The words hung between them, unforced, steady. Later that morning, she helped him haul feed to the lower pen, boots crunching through the stiff grass. A pair of crows watched from a fence post, wings puffed against the cold. Colter pointed to the far trough. "That one's cracked through. I'll need to cut a new plank." "I can try patching it," she offered. He gave a short nod. "There's pitch in the shed, cloth too." She fetched the supplies without needing to ask where. Her hands were red with cold by the time she finished, but the work was clean, the seal tight. Back at the house, Colter laid out a map across the kitchen table. He tapped a spot north of the ridge. "There's a wild plum grove here. I was thinking to fence it come spring." Aven leaned over the table beside him. "You want to run stock out that far, not cattle. Goats, maybe." "Something smaller." She studied the lines. "You'd need a second well." "There's a spring. If winter's kind, it'll hold through summer." She nodded once. "I could keep a garden there. The soil's darker near old roots." His gaze flicked to her. "Then we'll plant it together." She looked up, eyes catching his. "That what you want?" "I don't make plans with someone unless I mean to keep them." A long silence stretched between them, not uncertain, just full. That night she brought her sewing to the porch again. He joined her with a coil of rope to mend. They worked side by side until the moon rose silver and clean. Without looking up, she asked, "Why didn't you marry before?" Colter paused in his nodding. "I thought I might once, years back, but I was gone too long on a cattle drive. When I came back, she'd taken up with a merchant in Tucson. Did you love her?" "I thought I did, but I didn't know what that meant yet." Aven drew her thread through the fabric. And now he reached for her hand, rough fingers closing gently over hers. "Now I do." This time she leaned into him fully, her head resting on his shoulder. No hesitation, no guarded glances, just something settled. When the wind picked up, he pulled the blanket from behind them, wrapped it around both their shoulders. She stayed close. In the quiet, a new feeling took root, not just comfort, but a kind of belonging neither had known in years. Not safety from the world, but strength to face it. Together. And when the porch light burned low and her hand stayed tucked in his without needing to ask, it was clear they had already begun. By mid-December, the days shortened into gold-lit slivers, and the ground hardened beneath its frost with a quiet authority. Aven's breath steamed as she stepped outside each morning, her shawl pinned high at the throat. Skirts lifted slightly above her boots as she crossed the yard to the henhouse. The birds had slowed their laying, but she checked them all the same, fingers gentle on their wings and eyes sharp for signs of illness. Colter had built a smokehouse from old cedar planks that week, the scent of curing meat drifting through the cold. When she brought him a tin of warm biscuits late one afternoon, he was fitting the final hinge on the door. "You ever think of taking on a hand?" she asked, setting the tin on a stump beside him. He wiped his hands on a cloth. "Why?" "Because spring'll bring more than you can carry alone. And you don't ask for help unless it's the dying kind. You offering." She sat on the edge of the stump. "I've already been helping. I'm saying you deserve more than just getting by." He considered that, then said, "There's a fella east of the ridge, widow's son. Strong back, eyes that know work. I could ask, she nodded once. Do. He reached for a biscuit, broke it in half, and handed her the larger piece. You're right, you know, about me not asking. I don't mind that you're quiet, Colter. I mind when you carry things alone that don't need to be. He didn't answer right away. Then, would it suit you to stay, not just for now, for good? She met his eyes, biscuit untouched in her lap. It would. He reached for her hand, not fast, not fumbling, just sure. Her fingers folded into his, and neither of them looked away. She moved her things into his room that night, not because he asked, but because she wanted to. His bed was wide enough, but they lay close anyway. Not out of need, but because something about the space between them had long since disappeared. Winter held its grip longer than usual. When the snows came, they came thick, pressing against the windows and muffling the world. Inside, they kept to their rhythm, he mending harness or sharpening blades beside the stove, she stitching wool scraps into new linings for their coats. They spoke little and understood much. One afternoon, as the snow fell slow and steady, she took down the tin box from the shelf above the hearth. Inside were the seeds she'd saved from the last of the autumn squash, wrapped in soft muslin. She spread them across the table. You planning to plant all those come spring? Colter asked. Not all, but enough. You said we'd plant the grove, and I meant it. She picked up a seed, rolled it between her fingers. I used to think roots meant staying in one place. But I think they just mean you've chosen where to grow. He came to stand behind her, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. This the place you've chosen? She leaned into him. It is. That spring they fenced the grove. The boy from the ridge came to help, his mother bringing fresh bread and boiled molasses in thanks. Aven taught the boy's younger sister her letters on a blanket beneath the trees, her voice easy and sure. The girl listened with wide eyes and a stubborn chin that reminded Aven of Eliza. Colter built a second coop, and Aven painted the door herself, steady strokes of barn red against the grain. When the planting came, they worked side by side, hands in the earth, sweat beading on their brows. They didn't speak much then either, but their laughter came easier. That summer the garden bloomed wild lavender, squash blossoms, sorrel in tidy rows. She pressed herbs between sheets of old newspaper, labeling each for the apothecary. The woman there gave her a jar of rosehip jam in return and a soft pat on the shoulder that lingered longer than expected. They married under the cottonwood by the creek, Colter in his cleanest shirt, and Aven in a dress she'd stitched herself from calico. The widow from the ridge brought cornbread and pickled beans, and the boy, now taller, surer, played fiddle until the sun dipped low. That night they sat on the porch, the scent of honeysuckle thick in the air, her head resting on his chest, his hand resting over hers. The stars came out slow, one by one, and neither of them felt the need to speak. Years passed. The grove flourished under their care. Children came to the house to learn their numbers, and Aven taught them with the same calm steadiness she'd once given her sister in fevered nights. Colter built benches for them from pine, carving initials into the legs for each who passed through. They grew older. Their hands lined with work, their backs bowed slightly from the years. But every day they woke beside each other, shared bread and coffee, and walked the land together past the coop, past the fence, past the grove that now bent under the weight of fruit. On quiet evenings they still sat on the porch, her hand always in his, the silence between them deep and full as the sky. They didn't speak of the past anymore. They didn't need to. They'd made something that held, and it held.